Laini Taylor is a pink-haired writing genius. Hey BookTube, it's me again, Alexis. So today I wanted to talk to you about the top books that I've read this year, and I've narrowed it down to 6 of them. So I'm just going to get right into it, starting off with John Scalzi's series Lock In and Head On. The first book is Lock In. It's a sci-fi book about a detective whose dad is a famous basketball player and his partner is a chain-smoking integrator. So what is an integrator, you might ask? Well, the book is sci-fi because it takes place in a world where this disease called Hayden syndrome has taken over millions of people in its world. It starts with a disease similar to the flu, and then it moves into meningitis inflammation stage, and then the third and final stage is paralysis. You're paralyzed from your whole body, and it's called Lock In. You're still alive and breathing and capable of living, but you're not able to move. But to get around that, they have created these robots that can link up to your brain, because when you get the disease, when you get Hayden syndrome, your brain chemistry changes a lot, and they have the ability to connect you with a threep, which is just a robot. It's just a vehicle for you to exist in the world. And if you do get Hayden syndrome, but you survive without being paralyzed, you're an integrator. So that's how his partner is his detective, police partner, but also an integrator. And this provides a really interesting background for how the two of them work together, and the fact that the main character's dad is a famous football player is how the main character gets lots of money. And I will say one of the most interesting things about this series is that even through the second book, we do not know if the main character is a male or a female. It's just not part of the story. And I actually didn't notice this until after I finished the first book and I was describing the character to someone. And I didn't know how to describe him as male or female. I haven't read any other book that could successfully do that for so long, and I think it points out our society's standards on what it means to be a male or female, because do we judge if the main character is a male or female based on their actions, or based on what? So I'm just gonna leave John Scalzi's world where he was. The last thing I'm gonna say before I go, Victoria Schwab is one of my favorite authors of all time, up there with Brandon Sanderson for me. And I saw the both of them at a panel together, Victoria Schwab and next to Scalzi, talking about how great their skills of world building are. So if you've read A Darker Shade of Magic or any of Victoria Schwab's writing, and you really liked her take on world building and her style, you might really like John Scalzi. Book number 2 is Hero of the Ages. So this is Brandon Sanderson's third book in the Mistborn trilogy, and there's not really much I can say about this book without spoiling the book. If you haven't read Mistborn, basically it's in a world where mists appear late at night and take over the landscape. There's a magic system built up around ingesting metals. Different metals give you different powers. So I don't know where I was. I had to stop recording because someone came into the dorm room next to me and I wasn't expecting it, and I was kind of shocked. You heard my dog bark. And the next book I'm going to recommend is Trail of Lightning. So this is a Navajo fantasy that takes place in a world that's been impacted by climate change wars. It starts off with the main character is traveling with this, her granddad's grandson. So technically they're not related at all. The main character is kind of like a supernatural killer. She just hunts supernatural beings that are harming villages and puts an end to them. It has been compared to Supernatural, believe it or not. And I really liked the book because I love anything that has to do with climate change, because I think it's important for us to put it in fantasy and to put it in the world, because that's where people interact with it, and it's easier to get a grip on climate change if we put it in something that's enjoyable. Trail of Lightning, definitely recommend. The second book just came out and it's looking pretty great. The way the first book ends, I'm not sure where this one's going to pick up, because the cover art has me confused as to what's happened to where the characters end up where they are. Next book I'm going to recommend is Beneath the Sugar Sky. This is the third book in the Wayward Children book series, and I really like this one because the first 2 books are kind of unique to a set of characters, whereas you don't need to read the first 2 in order. You could read them out of order and that doesn't make any difference. But this third one, I definitely recommend you reading the first book before the third one at least. Like, the second one isn't necessary to understand what's happening in the third one, but the first one provides a good amount of background, so it's like semi-important. What happens in this book? The children who are staying in this home all come together and have to team up for an adventure between the doors. So if you haven't heard anything about this book, The Wayward Children is a concept where at some point in your life, a door opened for you to take you to the world you were meant to be in. And each person is meant for a different world, as each person is a unique individual. If you get kicked out of your world for whatever reason, you end up going to the home for wayward children. There you live with other people who have left their doors, where at least you get some sort of normalcy, because in the real world, you talk about what went behind your door, where if you played flutes for dancing skeletons, people will think you're crazy, but you really played a flute for dancing skeletons. I've always thought about it with fantasy, where like all these fantasy worlds need to have a way to interact together that would make it more realistic and really cool and really fun for me to believe. The concept of the doors makes all these different fantasy worlds possible. It also, in a way, like the concept of all the doors reminds me of 100 Cupboards. I haven't read it or even looked at it since like middle school, but it was a book where this guy stays at a summer camp and he like slowly peels away wallpaper and finds doors behind the wallpaper, and they lead to mysterious places. And they're all on one wall. So part of me in my mind pictures like the doors existing in one place, because they come and go as they please. I really enjoyed the concept of this book. I really enjoyed where it went. You got to see other worlds, both sense and nonsense. You got to see old characters from the first book, and which is why the first book is kind of semi-important to this plot. And I just really enjoyed it all around. So you should, if you haven't given it a chance, you should give it a chance. Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. If you don't know Laini Taylor, let me take a second to bring you to her world. Laini Taylor is a pink-haired writing genius. She wrote the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy. I will trigger warn you, the second book has some violence in it that it's graphic. If you read The Poppy War and you were fine with the violence in The Poppy War, Daughter of Smoke and Bone will be like an easy breeze. But I just want to warn you, it does get violent. Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy, like, I'm just going to ignore that for right now. Muse of Nightmares is the second book. It follows Strange the Dreamer is the first book, and in Strange the Dreamer, Laszlo Strange is a nobody in a magical town who just is basically a librarian. And this makes him incredibly happy. He doesn't care about having things as long as he has access to books and learning. And Laszlo, we all feel that way. I would give up so many things if I just had time to sit and read. Like, being a librarian sounds amazing. In fact, I have many close friends who are librarians, and shout out to them and all that they do for our world. And with that said, Laszlo Strange, if you know anything about Laini Taylor's characters at all, ever, she often portrays them in a way that they might be a nobody, but you really have to know that they're not a nobody and that they're going to be somebody. Where Laszlo ends up going in the first book is to a village where there is this magical floating cathedral containing blue people. Except the city doesn't know that there's any more blue people alive up there. The blue people in the Citadel Tower are magical people. So I think there's 4 people up there, 3 girls and 1 boy. Yeah, that sounds about right. And they all have different abilities. For example, if they're living in a cathedral, they have to have access to food, water, and heat, which they do, because one of them has the power to make rain clouds come at any time. It just rains for them. Stormwater is very pure and very drinkable. Another one has the ability to grow plants. They gotta be able to eat, and so this person just takes seeds that have been left or whatever, somehow finds a way to make life bloom in this place, and the water, of course, comes from the person who wields water. And then there's also a person with fire, which you need heat for cooking and so many other things, and those are like their essential elemental magic people there. But there's also a person who has the power to hold on to dead souls in the form of ghosts, and so that way when you die, your soul can be prevented from evanescing. And it's really such a beautiful book. The main girl from the Citadel has the power to go into people's dreams via moths. Every night she screams and moths come out of her mouth and land on people in the city below, and she can see all of their dreams, which is how they have gotten any touch with the outside world. The second book, it took me a while to get into it because I don't know, I just was like, come on, Lainey, like, pick it up. So I struggled to get into it, but once I did get into it, I couldn't stop. In fact, I listened to the audiobook between driving places where I was going for 3+ hour drives so that I would have no other choice but to listen to the book, and worked in my favor because I ended up loving it. If you had struggles finishing Muse of Nightmares, or if you weren't as interested in reading it, but you did like Daughter of Smoke and Bone, you need to read Muse of Nightmares, because at the end of it, there is hints that there is going to be a crossover book. I won't say what the hints are because that would be a spoiler. This will be an important book in that world. And last but not least, my last book I'm going to recommend is The Last Magician. It's a time travel fantasy in old New York, where magic is considered an affinity, so if you have a magical gift, it's considered your affinity. So the plot of the story, this girl lives in present-day New York, and she has to go back to old New York using her affinity, which is time travel, to steal a book. And this book is a very powerful magical book called the Ars Arcanum. So this book contains the magic ability needed to make people with magic abilities safe in New York, because in the time she travels to, the power hasn't yet shifted from the magician to the normal people, or the people without any magic, the mundane. And so if she steals this book and brings it to the present, she might change that outcome where in the present New York, people don't have magic and live, if they do have magic like her, they live with it hidden and they don't really use it because it's dangerous if they get found out. So her job is to prevent that outcome by going into the past and stealing this book. And when she's in the past, she meets a crew and they take on a dangerous role of stealing this book. They were already going to steal the book to begin with. It's just her job to steal it and bring it someplace else. And that's all I really want to say about it. I enjoyed the book. I'm waiting for the next book right now from my library, so obviously I enjoyed it. With that said, those are the 6 books I wanted to recommend to you guys. I do want to end by saying I'm currently reading City of Brass for a book club, and I'm loving it so far. Like, I've only been reading it for a couple days, and I'm like more than halfway done. It's going to be finished before next week for sure. Those are the books I have been reading and not really discussing because I've been busy, and I think you should read them too, or at least check them out if you've read any of them. What were your opinions on them? Let me know. With that said, have a good day. Go read a book.
I thought I needed to run and find somebody to love, but all I needed was some coconut oil. Don't worry about the small things, I know I can do all things. Mama always told me it would be alright.
Different metals give you different powers, and so if you're a climate denier, you should probably leave. And those are, I don't think I skipped a couple, actually.